The Darklands are one of the most forsaken and distant lands in the Warhammer universe. On the edge of the world of playable races from the tabletop, the Darklands is the last stop before getting into the distant kingdoms of Ind and Cathay. This is also the most likely target for the region of play for Total War Warhammer 3, adding in new races and a bunch of different flavors for the current races. So in today's video, I would like to color the Darklands with you guys, like a big-ass coloring book. And together, as we build out possible locations of where each race might start on the map. So what we're going to do is start with a blank map of the Darklands. And this is the blasted region in all of its splendor, nestled between the World's Edge Mountains and the Mountains of Morn. It is the home of Skaven, Chaos Dwarfs, Ogres, Dwarfs, no like normal dwarfs, Greenskins, and many of the other races of old and new worlds combined. Now, meeting the ocean far to the south, the bleak shores of the Darkland are dotted with trading colonies, with high-elf strongholds, and a variety of other goodies. Now, we can't do this video without talking about the obvious ogre in the room. God, I'm so funny. But the supposed leaked map of the data mined Total War Warhammer 3 settlements and territories. We'll take that with a grain of salt. It's not even like a full map of all of the regions. It's just kind of like, hey, here's a data mined map we found that we think might have something to do with it. But I'll flash it up on the screen as well, just because that's going to come up in conversation, but we'll make our own map. That's right. It'll be the new data mined map, sourced with lore knowledge. Now, I want to start this video out with a huge shout out to Weaponmaster470. He sent me a ton of stuff on Reddit to really light the spark that is the video. So he deserves a ton of credit here. So thank you very, very, very much, Weaponmaster470. He sent me so much stuff in the past, and he was the one that was kind of the driving force behind the special cities and locations of both Nagaroth and of Ulthuan. He had done that in depth, and I took his information with his blessing and made the videos. So this is, again, the same scenario. He even sent them to me in a message to listen. You should do a video. So that's what happened. So let's get into this behemoth. Starting with the walking bar stools, we'll get into the dwarfs. Now, there's a lot of diversity for possible locations of the dwarfs across this map. We know that the Chaos Dwarfs were, at one time, a simple dwarf hold, so there is a strong basis for dwarfs already expanding far to the east of the World's Edge Mountains. But we have a few carracks, or outposts, that dot the mountains and landscapes. Starting actually far to the north, and on the eastern portion of the World's Edge Mountains, we can see High Pass. This is the northernmost entrance into the Darklands from the Old World, with Kislev holding the westernmost portion of this land. Along High Pass is Kraz Und, which is not really a dwarf hold, but Und means sentry or watchtower in the language of the Karazankor. So I think it's Kazalid. So we could see a small bastion of dwarfs in this area leading right into the Darklands at the topmost portion of the map. Closest to where I'll get into is my suspected starting position for the Kislevites, but Karak Vlog used to be the furthest northern hold in the Karazankor and played a heavy hand in the last great war against chaos. Karak Vlag has this really kind of rich history of blacksmiths, and even as an isolated hold, it was still really known across the entire Karazankor. But unfortunately, it completely disappeared during the war, which leaves all this mystery surrounding it. And it's like right there, right next to Krag Und. So I'm sorry, Kraz Und. So it could kind of play, either one could play a hand here. The disappearance is all kind of crazy. During the war, they say, oh, we'll go send some dwarfs over to Karak Vlag. They send them over there, and they're like, well, there was a hold here, and there's not one now. So that's kind of the weird, mysterious disappearance of it all. Like, it was there, and now it's not, and no one knows anything about it. So, needless to say, we won't be seeing this in Total War Warhammer 3 as the game takes place far after this point in history, but it's definitely worth bringing up. So, moving far to the south along the World's Edge Mountains, we come to the Death Pass, which lies through the mountains closest to Karak Drorn and Karak Eight Peaks. Now, just to the south of that, we have the mighty Karak Azul, which does not mean blue in Dwarfish like it does in Spanish. Carrick Azul, or Iron Peak, is the last dwarf hold actually held by the dwarfs themselves in the far-flung southern territories. It is still inhabited by dwarfs and acts as a mainstay for any expeditions into the Mountains of Morn. We've talked about Carrick Zorn. Carrick Zorn is the last, was the southernmost realm before it was taken over, but we'll get into that in a little bit here. But it is, when Carrick 8 Peaks was refounded, the underway was opened back up to connect the two great holds, and the underway is used by the dwarfs. We haven't really got into much about the underway, but the underway is used by the dwarfs is kind of in the same way that the under empires for the Skaven. They use these to connect all the holds without even actually having to leave the holds themselves and going into the surface. But jump across the great expanse, that is the Darklands, and we have a few abandoned mines and holds in the Mountains of Morn, namely Carrick Azorn, Carrick Vrog, Carrick Krakatan, and Cragspike Peak. Now, unfortunately, the majority of these holds have been abandoned or overrun or like completely destroyed. And there's a few mentions here and there of some hidden holds that dot the mountains, but CA, they did return Carrick Zorn to its former glory. So there's no telling what they could do with any number of these dwarfs in this territory, because all this stuff is relatively hearsay. It's just like, oh, these holds existed, but there's not a lot of history behind them. And Carrick Zorn kind of has that same thing going for it. Hey, Carrick Zorn was the furthest southern hold of the Dwarf Empire, but it was overrun by Lizardmen. That's all we know. If there's not a big crazy history, oh, they were the biggest and baddest of people that had beards that also sometimes had red in them. Like, we don't know anything about that. So, moving on. Our last big dwarf hold is as far to the north. The lost hold of Carrick Doom, which, truth be told, is like too far out of the way in my opinion. It's very close to the Chaos Dwarf fortress of Uxkuak, or the Palace of Skulls, but it was almost completely destroyed by chaos and was last seen in a Gotrek and Felix novel. It's kind of like perpetually under siege by a very small contingent of it's perpetually under siege, and a very small contingent of surviving dwarfs are there to protect it, but it's just constantly besieged by chaos. But just an honorable mention, though, and this is just kind of one that I don't think will have an actual barons in the game, but there's Clan Helheim. They mention having some of its warriors sojourning into the Mountains of Morn, but not necessarily kind of stating where they went when they journeyed into the Darklands. It's worth noting that Clan Helheim had a huge part to play in the Battle of Dragonfire Pass, and some of the regiment of renown with that same name might contain some of the members of Clan Helheim, as well as Clan Ekrund. So, let's take a look at the map now, right? And we've populated roughly where we could see a dwarf presence on this map. Using state-of-the-art technology, we can actually see what this would look like. That's right. A simple faction symbol placed on the map. That's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to populate this map with each and every race. With dwarfs in the northwestern portion and the southwestern portion, they'll probably frame the map with their presence. Who can tell if they're going to be in the northeastern portion as they resurrect some of those holds and what have you. Can't talk about the dwarfs without mentioning one of their most hated of foes. And no, I'm not talking about the High Elves. The Greenskins are dotted all around this map as well, from black orcs to hobgoblins and other long-nosed, disgusting creatures. Speaking of black orcs, we'll start with them, actually. They have a passing mention in Gul Kathaka, which lies slightly in the east of the Plain of Bones, which we'll go into shortly with the vampires, but they also take up residence in one of their chief strongholds in the Mountains of Morn, Mount Blackfang. Now, during Greasus Goldtooth's rise, it was the Black Orcs from this very stronghold that he fought against to kind of help carve out a bloody empire amongst the mountains and the other tribes. And we'll discuss more about that with our video of Greasus Goldtooth, don't you damn well worry. But during our video on Clan Rictus, we talked about Mount Greyhag and Mount Grimfang, but we know these locations to be filled with your typical kind of run-of-the-mill goblins, just green goblins. And goblins that are stuck in perpetual tribal civil wars and are kidnapped as slaves by the Skaven of Clan Rictus. And there's a pretty substantial tragic history surrounding these mountains, especially Grimfang, which used to be Silver Peak, the premier silver mine in the Karazankor. Outside of these two mountains to the south and southwest, there is the Vale of Webs, which is inhabited by Arachnarok spiders, and also several ogre tribes, and namely the Blood Guzzles. So Will we see greenskins starting right amongst the ogres? Maybe an AI with more than average Ragnarok spiders? I'd be more than okay with that glorious scenario. I mean, just greased up guts against furry spider talons. And I said that all out loud. Ugh. But lastly, there's plenty of mentions of hobgoblins in the Darklands, namely throughout the northern portions, the center and the Wolflands, and the eastern portion in the Vale of Woe, right by Mount Blackfang. And we'll go into hobgoblins as a whole in their own video to discuss in the video about the Chaos Dwarfs, to discuss their history and everything, as I feel that now that we'll be talking about them more, it's a good thing if you guys know more about them. They typically are kind of like the slave caste of the Chaos Dwarf army. And they play a pretty heavy hand in more or less kind of like just being the base level goblin. Like goblins are to orcs as hobgoblins are to Chaos Dwarfs, if that makes sense. But that's another race down, so we definitely see some greenskins in the south, kind of southwest by Crookback Mountain, but then also in the northwest with possibly some in the center by the Plain of Bone. Speaking of the Plain of Bones, what a great segue into the vampire counts. It's as if I planned it and I am the architect of this very video. Well, you bet your high betting ass that I am. This was the plan all along. Either way, the most prolific part of the Plain of Bones is the Fortress of Vorog, home of the mighty Vorog Bloodytooth. Now, Vorog was regarded as the first ghoul king. Don't get this confused with Ush-Oran, who is the primogenitor of the Strigoi bloodline, and was kind of like the emperor of the resurgent vampires in Morkane. But instead, Vorog had the goblins that he enslaved from the Red Cloud tribe build him a massive fortress that fell into ruin after his defeat at the hands of a bolt thrower, right through the heart. But I mean, when has CA ever let sleeping dogs lie? So there's a huge possibility there. So to have Vorag in his mighty keep in the Fortress of Vorag in the middle of the Plain of Bones. But far to the southwest of the Plain of Bones, closer more to the lands of the Tomb Kings, we have the obvious Nagashazar. Now, this is the home of the mighty Nagash, after he fled into exile away from ancient Hekara. Now, it's hard to say how this will be implemented into Total War Warhammer 3. In the lore, Nagash's kind of dried out husk remains in his necromantic castle, kind of biding his time as his agents, Krell, scour the old world to regain his strength. Think undead Emperor of Mankind via Warhammer 40,000. But he does have a cult of disciples that worship him like a god. So maybe we'll see just a generic vampire count unit here, or disciples of Nagash, until the eventuality of his return into the game when he leads the armies. But that typically means that they're going to start some sort of end time scenario, or something's going to happen that is going to wipe out some other lords to bring Nagash back. That's what happens in the end times. Some lords got to go down, include to make the mighty Nagash come back. But then we have the Silver Pinnacle, which is the home of Neferata and her Lamian vampires. In fact, we don't really hear much about the Silver Pinnacle in the lore outside of Neferata capturing it from dwarfs. She essentially swarms the halls with undead until all the dwarfs are killed, and then takes the dwarfs' holds for her and her coven of vampires. The Lamian vampires are all these like sexy temptress vampires. In the 6th edition lore, they were used to infiltrate through harems or using their bodies to get closer to their targets. They were just kind of definitely more of like a subterfuge type vampire bloodline compared to, like, say, the blood dragons, which were like up close and personal. Let's have an honorable duel and I'll kill you. But these 3 locations really allow the vampire counts to be spread across the map. In the northwest, Silver Pinnacle, as we've already kind of seen on our maps already. Southwest with Nagashazar, and south central with the Plain of Bones. Of course, these will primarily be generic lords until there's some form of rollout for Nagash and for Neferata, who are very integral to the end times, like I was saying. But I'd love to see CA kind of release a Bloodlines DLC and just have Ush-Oran, Neferata, Waswaran, and Abhorrash all enter the game as playable lords. I mean, why not, right? Either way, let's move on to another race here as we continue to populate our map of the Darklands and not get lost in my fantasies of DLC where Abhorrash single-handedly kills the entirety of the Warhammer world. Moving on, This might be a bit of an easier and a no-brainer here with the Warriors of Chaos that we're about to go into, but the Darklands are steeped in some form of chaos. I mean, even the Chaos Dwarfs and Ogres are basically just bastard Chaos children in their own way, kind of like the redheaded Chaos children from the first marriage. But as far as actual specifics, as far as like actual landmarks and fortresses, there aren't a ton of locations, but it's safe to say we can take a look at the starting location of Chaos in Games 1 and really use that right across the board in Game 2. You know, Archaon can start hooting and hollering in the northwest corner of ready to plunder down the line into the greater Darklands. And Tamarkon really gives us a lot of hints, or at least insight, into how the Darklands could be filled out from here. One of the prominent tribes would be the Dolgans. Now, there are multiple Marauder tribes, Norskins, Mungs, and then the mighty Kurgan. Varduk Krom, the Herald of Archaon, is a member of the Kurgan tribe, which, as you can see, is the next massive tribe to the east of Norska, inhabiting the northern wastes. The Kurgan spill down into the Darklands in droves. The Dolgans, who we've just mentioned, are easily the largest and most powerful of all the Kurgan tribes. What's interesting, too, is that most other Northmen do not get along and outwardly hate one another. So you're not going to see some unified band of Northmen, you know, Norska plus Kurgans, sweeping down into the Old World and Darklands, respectively. The Dolgans are famed for their horsemen and raiding capabilities, even, you know, taming the mighty war mammoths that Sail the Faithless rides into combat, and he's one of the famous Kurgans, or I'm sorry, one of the famous Dolgans. And this tribe is even more exemplary for its differing customs, I guess you could say, depending on the geographical location of that portion of Dolgan that you come across. The northern Dolgans are more primitive and barbaric, and in line with the kind of the archetypical marauder. Lots of fur, lots of axes, and smells like pig tallow. Now, the southern Dolgans have invaded and fought the Kislevites for a longer portion of their history. As a result, they have actually taken over and inhabited many Kislev cities, spawning what is called Kislevite Dolgans. This might be a kind of a great starting location for a portion of the tribe, depending on how they implement Kislev into the map. Maybe the majority of the Kislev Empire is held by Kislev, but the other portions are controlled by Dolgans, and that's objective number 1 for them, you know, reclaim the empire. So this puts Chaos on our map in their, albeit typical fashion, far to the north, you know, kind of marauding down into the more southern portions of the map. Bit easier to color this one, so we'll gallop. My puns are just god-awful. Either way, we'll gallop over to our next faction, which, if you haven't guessed, is Bretonnia. Gallop, horses, whatever. So, Bretonnia is a bit different from the other races here. I wish I had some great epic to go into about how Bretonnia has always had some strong foothold in the Darklands, and from there they launched grand crusades for Zaladi, amassing a massive treasure of holy artifacts that they can use to sit around a feasting table, pompously declaring that they are the most French faction in the game. Sadly, that is not the case. Bretonnia has had a few crusades and errantry wars into the Mountains of Morn, but nothing overly huge. One instance of note is Sir Baldrin of Brionne. He's one of the very first questing knights, and he gets this wild hair across his ass to go into Darklands to fight, find, and kill monsters. Now, this is a land filled with every type of monster, like Monster Hunter World level filled with monsters. So you can imagine how this turned out for old Baldy. He was slaughtered, and his life is recounted by Empire minstrels in a mocking tune known as Quest's End. Cheeky Empire folk. And another grisly ordeal with Bretonnia involves Gark Ironskin. Now, Gark is a pretty interesting character. He's an Ogre Kingdom's tyrant out of the Ironskin tribe, but he's one of the chief allies of the Chaos Dwarfs because he has this overwhelming obsession with metal. Ironskin, I get it. Subtle Games Workshop. Well, there was an errantry war in or around the area, and Gark single-handedly killed his way through the majority of the knights errant present on top of his gigantic Rhinox, Bladehorn. Eventually, Bladehorn was killed by a single unit of Grail Knights, you know, because they're AP and anti-large if they're the Lance variant. In fact, the lore actually states that Bladehorn was skewered with lances, so my joke works. And Gark then killed the unit to a man and ate them like all ogre stories. And he kind of like festooned his whole body with their shields and their heraldry and parts of their armor. And that's kind of like a repeating thing you will see with the ogres. They're kind of always covering themselves in shards and pieces of other factions. They're this very ramshackle faction in and of themselves, barely held together by their tyrants, with very, very loose kind of organization amongst them. So it fits the overall feel of the ogre. So Bretonnia doesn't really get a settlement of placement on our map here, unfortunately. We do know that the Ironskin tribe's home is on the northwestern edge of the Mountains of Morn, to the immediate east of the Plains of Zar, close to Zar Nagron, so that's going to be my placement for a Bretonnia rogue army. That might be the closest we get to their placement on this map. Since we're on the subject of hooves, might as well segue now into the Beastmen and their presence in the land as a whole. Now, with the land filled with chaos energies and all sorts of mischief, you would think that the Beastmen are going to be everyone's neighbors. And that's not really the case here. See, the Beastmen love forests. They don't do well sticking to open plains. In fact, every major instance of Beastmen in the lore deals with them coming in and out of forests for the most part. If you think of the way things are kind of constructed in the mini campaigns all throughout the forested regions of the Empire. And this might be because of their propensity for massive amounts of ambushes, and maybe there's a higher amount of game for them to kill in between raids. I'm not sure. Another big factor in that is the chaos energy that is always inherent in almost every forest in the Warhammer world. Even Avalorn is filled with dark parts of its forest, Athaloran included. I mean, in both instances, the lore talks about the twisting portions of the forest that are so old that you shouldn't go there because the old energy is there, the old chaos energy is there, and it's dark and twisted. Even portions of the Wood Elf campaign talk about sending people to those portions or misleading them till they get to those portions and get devoured by whatever chaos energy is there. The forests all around the Empire are filled with Beastmen, and the entire forested foothill region of the northwest of Naggaroth are just Beastmen central. In fact, that's actually one of the largest conglomeration, I guess, businessmen. The largest gathering of Beastmen is in that northwestern portion of Naggaroth. And they always talk about these fell waystones that the Beastmen congregate around to commit to their rituals, sacrifices, and other means of cavorting with the Chaos Gods. Sticking mainly to forests and foothills, though, there's not a lot of places for the beasts to hide on the map of the Darklands, except for the Haunted Forest. And this mighty forest spans almost the entirety of the Sea of Dread, with the River of Ruins Delta on the west end and the Ind itself on to the east. And you can kind of see that this kind of stops just short of the World's Edge Mountain, so it almost extends the entirety of the southern portion of the Darklands. And we don't actually know a ton about the Haunted Forest, and it leaves a lot for CA to fill in the blanks and discover. There's scant mentions of lore creatures here and there, or some inhabitants at this part of the forest, so on and so forth. A lot of hearsay or minor mentionings, but nothing pivotal. And that is going to be one of the biggest things about the Darklands. Going into Total War Warhammer 2, we had a really good idea of what Lustria is like. We have a really good idea of what's Naggaroth and Ulthuan's going to be like. We had a very bleak idea of what the Southlands were like. We knew of certain situations like Araby and Nehekara, but the far Southlands, like where we've got Clan Moors being stationed, where we've got the defenders, the last defenders being stationed, like those portions of the Southland weren't really fleshed out in the lore. And it's been really great to see CA kind of take that liberty and say, okay, well we're going to flesh it out in our own way using this one sentence that we saw in the lore here, or these two paragraphs here. So they do a really good job at this, and I'm not worried in any way about the mass amount of lack of lore there is for the Darklands, because the Darklands are, as you guys have probably seen from this video, it's small blurbs here and there in the 8th, 7th, and 6th edition books. Hey, here's a quick entry for Sir Baldrin of Barion. Like, we saw that was such a small little minor entry. So that's the kind of repeating thing with the Darklands, is there isn't a lot of huge sweeping lore like there is for the Old World, or for Lustria, or there is for Ulthuan. So that kind of is going to color what CA delivers to us. We're kind of coming back on point here to the Beastmen. In the Ogre Kingdoms book, we have the Great Bull Roast of 2300. and or negative 2300. And this is where ogres and beastmen had this huge battle, resulting in the roast of many doom bulls, because again, ogres eat fucking everything. And the only other mention we have is of the beastmen joining Tamarkan's army in the far eastern mountains of Morn as he moved from Cathay to the Darklands. So we might see them throughout the eastern portion of the mountains, I'm not really sure. But just to kind of recap here, there's a possibility of us having beastmen in the southern portion of the Darklands, right before you jump over to the Dragon Isles in the Haunted Forest. Then we'd be looking far to the east for some mountain action. Maybe all those beastmen are goat-born and just bleat furiously in the mouth of ogres before they're devoured. Not sure, but I mean, that sounds kind of right on point for a beastman. Either way, let's round out our journey through the races of Total War Warhammer 1. We have the Wood Elves, the stuck-up cousins of an already stuck-up race of stuck-up individuals. The word Ponzi comes to mind. Now, we might not have talked much about this, but the Wood Elves can travel around the world utilizing the world roots of the world tree. This is what connects both Athel Loren and Averlorn, as well as the Everqueen's kind of perpetual connection to their long-lost cousins. The Everqueen is that dual ruler of the matriarch, I guess you could say, of the High Elves. And these roots span through a great deal of the world and are much stronger in some places than in others. So for the most part, though, the roots that extended into the Darklands are completely done, dead. They've won. Well, root. Now, if we recall in Total War Warhammer 2, we had the Wood Elves of Orion. This was a really cool throwback mention to one of the first regiments of renown ever to have ever existed. And Orion was a wood elf that became a sea elf under Lord Stelior. And just so you guys know, sea elves was basically the moniker that they gave to any elf that was a predominant sailor, more or less. It wasn't an actual race of individualistic or different elves. It was just, oh, you're a wood elf, you're going to go on the sea a bunch of times, you're a sea elf until you come back. But that's just kind of a weird thing. Under Stelior, they fought deep into the heart of the Southlands. So there's a really cool nod there as Orion lies smack dab on a part of the thicker branch of roots that extends into the Southlands from the World Tree. And taking a look at the portion that extends into the Darklands, we can see it terminates in 2 points. We can also see the River Ruins Delta exiting into the Sea of Dread, so we know that this puts the Wood Elves in the Haunted Forest alongside a possible Beastman presence, and just north of where their High and Dark Elf kins might reside. And as we continue to flesh out this map, we're going to see how much of a hotbed this southern portion of the map is going to be, and how it will be spread out a little more to make more sense without just being a giant clusterfuck. I'm hoping it's not just, hey, we're gonna put all these races one settlement or one region away from each other, and let's just see how the dice roll. Like I hope it's actually kind of nicely spread out. So we might see another Heart of the Forest type settlement like in Orion, or it might be just faced with a Wood Elf rogue army. CA really likes to populate the map with as much familiarity as they can, so I can see this being a settlement over a rogue army, if you ask me. Now that we've gotten Game 1 races out of the way, though, we can kick this bad boy into overdrive with the races, well, come on, who am I kidding? The one race that I actually care about and actually am excited for, the High Elves. So when the High Elves really rose to prominence after the Great Catastrophe, they spread around the globe. And we talk about the ancient elf empire and how it was in the old world, the Badlands, the Southlands, portions of Nagaroth, really just everywhere, even as far as Ind and Cathay. I mean, they have a lot of stuff over in that region. So the same holds true for our map here in the Darklands. Now in Game 2, we've seen a sample of that, in the Citadels of Dawn and Dusk, at the tips of Lustria and Southlands. But to the east of the Southlands, we also have Tora Lesor, the Tower of the Sun and the Tower of Stars. We see those in the map as well. And the High Elves really just went all willy-nilly, traversing the entire globe with their pointy helmets and snarky attitudes. So how does this play into our Darklands map? Well, the city of Spires is on the northwesternmost edge of Ind, just to the east of the Dragon Isles across the Lizard Sea. The city of Spires is still standing as of the 8th edition, so it gives her a very great location for the High Elves to get some playtime on the Darklands map. And depending on how southern they go, they might include Tora Lesor has some significance with the Dark Elves. And the High Elf Navy patrols the region of sea between the 2 points quite frequently. So you kind of have this very seafaring empire. And you know how they always talk about the British Empire, how at its height the sun rose and set on the British Empire. The High Elf Empire, at its height, had settlements or these major cities or these major fortresses spread throughout the world, especially in the Old World. I mean, the Sea Elves were in places that are now Altdorf and Marienburg. Those at one point were Grand Elf cities. So the Elves are kind of just all over the place. But other than that, some time ago there was a White Dwarf, the first issue that reintroduced the Chaos Dwarfs, actually, in which both the Chaos Dwarfs and the High Elves fought at the Tomb of Anarel. Now, Anarel is an ancient mariner and one of the most important sea elves of Elven lore. The Citadel of Dusk in the Southlands, it resides on the Anarel Peninsula, just to give you an idea of how far sweeping this guy was. So there's a chance that we could see some elves around there as a rogue army, and a nice kind of nod to this. This would be just south of the Plain of Bones, where the Sea of Dread becomes the Bitter Sea. So this would actually be on Darklands proper, on the opposite end of the little delta there. So to recap, we have the City of Pillars, depending on how much of Ind we get visible on the map, and then Tor Lesor on the map for the High Elves. Now, and again, this is dependent on how south they want to go. They might just say, no, Tor Lesor is just too far south. It was already in Game 2, screw it. But this bad boy is really starting to flesh out. This map is starting to become a live thing, guys. And it makes me excited for when the actual map reveal will come. You know, during that video, we'll put both maps side by side and let's see how accurate or completely inaccurate we were. I mean, we might find out that some things weren't anywhere we thought they would be, or maybe we nailed it right off the gate. And oh yeah, shit, City of Pillars is there, and so is Tor Lesor. But it's going to be fun when they do release that campaign map, and we can kind of compare and contrast our notes. But since we've done the Wood Elves and the High Elves, it's only right we take care of their darker kin. The Dark Elves are a bit scarce on the map here, so it'll be interesting how they are included, and this will unfortunately be a tragically short entry, as I really have grown to love the Dark Elves. But now that I can play them as much, and the quick battles and what have you, I really enjoy them. In tabletop, I was always torn. Do I play High Elves or do I play Dark Elves? And I always ended up going with High Elves because they look just cooler to me. But now, having the chance to actually play the Dark Elves, I'm like, damn, should play the fucking Dark Elves in tabletop. But whatever. We all know the Dark Elves are renowned for their ability to raid and voyage off to far-off lands, you know, meet indigenous people, and enslave indigenous people. And there's a lot of this, that's a lot of the same thing going on here. The Dark Elves don't have some cool citadel that I would have expected in a place called the Darklands, nay. The closest thing the Dark Elves get to a foothold on this map is the Tower of Blessed Dread. This is, of course, the mighty Black Ark, led and captained by Lokir Fellheart. This is not, that's not an actual tower, it is Black Ark itself. And it was his father, Men Wraith Fellheart, before he was killed by an assassin, and has stayed with the Fellheart name ever since. So he inherited Daddy's Porsche, basically. Now, the lore describes Dark Elves spending a lot of time in Ind. Many renowned Dark Elves earned some of their initial infamy while raiding up and down the coasts of that country. In addition, they harried the many ports that dot the islands around the Darklands. Notably, Lokir Fellheart, you know, we just talked about, destroys Tor Lesor at one point in the latter portion of the lore. But you can even look at Coron Darkhand, the master of the Black Guard. He essentially cuts his teeth raiding up and down the Indian coast. But unfortunately, we don't have a set location for our Dark Elves, but I think that putting them here, you know, kind of west of the Dragon Isles, makes sense. This is a good striking distance between the High Elves and the coast, so they can just kind of meander around and harass us. What with their faces made of metal and their unnecessary comparison to Star Wars memes, but whatever. You were supposed to be the chosen one, Malekith. We're meant to reunite the elves, not leave them in darkness. Anyway, Lizardmen. Scaly, tall, full of anger. We know that the Lizardmen society is run almost entirely by their fat Pizza the Hutts. The Slan Mage Priests are the ruling caste, and the reason that the Lizardmen can form coherent thoughts for the most part. And without them, the Lizardmen, even the Skinks, would devolve into feral beasts without any form of direction. And this very thing happens to the inhabitants of the Dragon Isles, the isles that we've talked about for the past 3 or 4 entries. I'm so sorry that we have to wait to get to them. But during the Great Catastrophe, the Slann ruling over the island were killed by demons, resulting in the Saurus and Skinks eventually losing more and more of their sentience until becoming completely feral creatures. And the Dragon Isles themselves take on the form of a duplicate of Lustria, a kind of carbon copy 100 miles away. And the Isles are inhabited by all manner of beasts. Horned ones, cold ones, carnosaurs, salamanders, thunder lizards, great verms, everything that's somewhat a lizard and frightening, it's here. There's stories of Tillian adventurers that are trying to, penetrate the island and take all the diamonds and the riches that are scattered throughout the whole entire thing, because for some reason every single jungle faring civilization hoards riches beyond measure, but whatever. But even the dwarfs, they kill these mighty sea monsters right off the coast, so they're very familiar with the Dragon Isles. But needless to say, we'll definitely be seeing the Lizardmen all up in, on, and around the Dragon Isles, residing far to the south on our grand map here. Now, this is going to be probably our largest entry with the Skaven, but many of the biggest rumors surrounding the Darklands really start with our skittish, verminous, disgusting little friends in the Skaven. With the addition of Tretch Craventail and Clan Rictus, we finally saw the first murmurings of Crookback Mountain in the Darklands, even a possible expansion of our current map to include it. Much of the Darklands are inhabited by our little furry friends, and they, aside from being disgusting, are going to present a larger challenge for the players in Total War Warhammer 3 than they have in previous games, if you ask me. You won't have as much insulation from other factions getting in the way or stumbling across them first. The Skaven and the Chaos Dwarfs in particular have just as rocky of a history as the actual dwarfs too. So they'll be all up in those Dawizar beards with their luscious locks and luxurious veins. Let's move on. And it's important to note here that of all the races we've talked about, the races kind of frame the map, right? We talk about the dwarfs in the northwest and the southwest. We talk about the vampire counts maybe a little bit in the center, but mainly to the northwest/western portion with the Silver Pinnacle. We talk about the Greenskins in the northeast. We talked about the Beastmen in the south. We've talked about the Lizardmen in the south. We have the Dark Elves in the south, the High Elves in the south, the Wood Elves in the south. But the Skaven are going to be the ones that are going to be all throughout everything, aside from the Chaos Dwarfs and the Ogres. But the Skaven dot the eastern edge of the World's Edge Mountains too. They've gotten in multiple battles with both Chaos and regular dwarfs. And the Desolation of Drakenmore comes to mind, also known as the Nightmare of Drakenmore. And this is probably one of the most horrific displays of magic between the two armies. The Skaven, who are known for their already loose hold on magic at best, and the Chaos Dwarfs, corrupted by the fell powers of chaos, make for quite the spectacle. The kind of green phosphorus flashes of Skaven warp magic etched the sky as plumes of fiery chaos energy cracked back and forth between the armies. And there was so much reckless use of spellcraft that an actual tear in reality opened up over the battlefield, pouring malice and destruction into both armies, decimating them as demons kind of ripped through into the real world and attacked both foes. This horrible act took place just east of Karak Hadron, perhaps a ruined settlement or something of the sort as a nod to this. I'm not sure. Maybe just Drakenmore, which would be a really cool settlement for the Skaven to inhabit. CA does love to give us credence to really cool lore battles or lore happenings with settlements or characters and all sorts of goodies. So I think it's pretty safe to say we can expect something coming from that. But now, as far as the Mountains of Morn are concerned, the majority of the Skaven there were killed, enslaved, or really just outright eaten by the ogres. The ogres. Skaven are for kids, but there are still some layers that remain in the mountains with enough Skaven in them to field large armies that ambush and attack the ogre tribes as they move through the mountain passes. On that note, actually, the tribe of Tyrant Shrewd Fulg, that's his name, actually has an alliance with the Skaven clan Molder. And when he gets in disputes or just outright doesn't like certain ogres, he sends them off to Molder, the clan Molder itself, to get turned into cuter, cuddlier versions. A rat ogre. So Clan Krizor, one of the thrall clans of Clan Molder, might play a role in this alliance, as they are a lesser clan that owes its allegiance to its master, Molder. And we've talked about Clan Molder being housed in Hell Pit within the Northern Wastes, so maybe they're an option for Game 3 placement, but I'd put my money on Clan Krizor, as they hate Clan Rictus with They're like crazy like trade tariffs on passing through the pass through the World's Edge Mountains, because with that direct dichotomy, you can, kind of rest assured on being either Krizor or being Rictus is going to be really fun in Game 3, because you immediately have an enemy on your heels, on your tail, I guess you could say. But there are a number of other clans that we'll place on the map here as well, and as we have plenty in the Total War Warhammer 2 to take up residence in the ruins, the same should hold true for the third game. We've got Clan Crooktail. They take up residence in the northern wastes as well, and they kind of have all manners of mutations, having racked this clan as their tunnels are like just riddled with warpstone. Skaven cocaine. And you've got Clan Creepus. It's another Thrall clan, but this time they're a thrall to Clan Eshin. And we've discussed about Clan Eshin, how they learned their assassiny/rat ninja ways by watching and observing the ninjas of Far Cathay. They were actually even taught by some in kind of a limited fashion. Well, Clan Creepus maintains those connections after being freed by Clan Eshin from servitude, forever indebted to the clan. So they were going to be a pretty solid representation of Eshin in this map. Clan Grutnik is a powerful warlord clan that resides in a mountain that's filled to the brim with warpstone deposits, on top of the warpstones that crash in the open field of the Darklands itself. So, being opportunistic, they made trade deals with both Clan Scryer and Clan Molder, allowing them to prosper off both clans' greed for warpstone and requirement for their weird experiments. Then got Clan Gridus, was a former Thrall clan of Clan Moors, but broke off during one of the power vacuums that opened up when the great warlord of Clan Moors, Vermic, was killed. Now, the clan itself resides in a location called Seepgore, which is somewhere in the eastern World's Edge Mountains. I'm not 100% sure. And they are filled with storm vermin and former rat slaves, but they're made wealthy off the multitude of warpstone access that most Skaven of the Darklands have access to. Also, this is a big one, they have a gigantic mutated hell beast known as the Hell Beast of Seepgore that was commissioned by Clan Molder in exchange for a wealth of warpstone. Skaven cocaine is a hell of a drug. Now, our last Skaven clan is a bit of a unique one. There are 3 larger volcanoes in the Warhammer world: Red Cloud Mountain, Thunder Mountain, not the Disneyland ride, and Fire Mountain, the home of Clan Vulcan. The dwarfs have another name for it. It's Karag Haraz. They have a name for all 3 of the mountains. And beneath this mountain, the Skaven's fur is branded in it, and then it's dyed red like the fires that consume the mighty mountain. And they all wield these weapons of black obsidian. And as you might have guessed, there are a ton of warp fire throwers in this clan, as they're all pretty big pyromaniacs. And this is as unique because it's already on the map for the first game / Mortal Empires, so they might enable this clan with the third game, or maybe they completely bypass it. We'll see, but it's a really cool clan that I think is really cool and unique because it outright talks about having red fur as a not a mutation, or not having red fur because that's just the way these rats are, but consciously making their fur red as kind of an ode to the mountain, which is kind of interesting to me. So Skaven by far are going to have the most placements on the map, but we'll do our best to get lore-friendly locations for them, as some of them are completely ambiguous, but they're going to pepper this map with all manner of locations. I expect them to harass all the ruins throughout the land and have CA create even more clans that have kind of scant mentions or barely represented in the lore like we were talking about earlier. I'm always down for a little surprise here and there, despite how furry it is. Man! That could be interpreted in so many ways. Oof. Speaking of poorly placed sexual euphemisms, let's move on to the Tomb Kings, the Bone Daddies themselves, and our last race on this grand list of races to be placed on the Darklands map. The Tomb Kings have a pretty cool and epic history with the Darklands. To get into it, we have to go back to way before the Tomb Kings became Tomb Kings, when Alcatazar the Conqueror was roving through the lands, whomping and a-stomping. He had one chief lieutenant, Imrathepis, the Crimson King of Numas. And this badass covered his banners, his shields, everything in crimson. Even his war sphinx that he strode atop had stones that were painted red. He killed multiple vampires in single combat when they sacked Lamia. Just an all-around eater of faces. Then, of course, he died and became a Tomb King, making him an undead eater of faces. And he went pretty insane with Alcatazar to kind of temper his bloodlust, and he swept up north into the Badlands after he was resurrected as a Tomb King. He destroyed multiple orc tribes just like he did in life, and in the process, then moved over east through the World's Edge Mountains and into the Mountains of Morn. And there, he was beset by the ogres of the Thunderfoot tribe. Imhotep was pretty content in believing that these dudes were just big oafs that didn't really know their asses from a hole in the ground. Wrong. The ogres released a stampede of rhinoxes through a narrow mountain pass to completely destroy the skeleton army of Imhotep. It just like ground them to dust because they're massive rhinoxes. And there's this cool kind of last stand moment where even though Imhotep was surrounded and alone, he charged forward with his war sphinx, killing droves of ogres in the process. But eventually, he succumbed and had his leg turned into a goddamn toothpick. Talk about a ye old teabagging, man. But his son, Rakov III, would avenge him 10 years later by bringing not one, but a dozen war sphinxes with him into the mountain. They arrived at Mount Crag, which actually resides above the ogre tribe. And Rakov's war sphinxes caused a massive avalanche that buried the entire Thunderfoot tribe in rock and ice, trapping and killing them. So, way to one-up daddy there. So we have this kind of interesting situation here, right? We have some options. The Crimson Army of Numas could be a rogue army, or it could be placed in either Mount Crag or Daggertooth Valley, you know, the valley that both Imhotep and Rakov took getting to Mount Crag. So we have one of three options, and I guess we'll just kind of place them here as it maybe makes the most sense, or we can maybe see them around this point because this is where they all eventually ended. That does it though. That's our map for Total War Warhammer 3 and the current races. In our next video, we'll do the 4 races that I'm going to say will be in the 3rd entry of the series, as well as their placement on this map. I was going to do it all in this video, but this is just so much longer than I had originally intended, and I don't want to bombard you guys all at once. I want it to kind of be easy and digestible. So that video will be coming out here as soon as possible. So subscribe if you'd like to see the continuation of this 2-part series. And as you can see, though, there's plenty of representation for our beloved races in a potential Darklands. I'm really excited for what Creative Assembly has in mind for the 3rd game in this series. I know it's been a pretty wild ride for me. I mean, with the DLCs and the FLCs, and is it coming, is it not? Is it coming, is it not? I don't know. But I'm loving the series, and the best part is that it's not even over yet. I mean, Game 3 is so far out. Hopefully, we'll start to trickle out more and more info about Game 3 in the coming months here, because Three Kingdoms launches later this year, so we're going to be dealing with a lot of Three Kingdoms lore soon here. But we'll be covering Kislev, the Ogre Kingdoms, Chaos Demons, and Chaos Dwarfs in our next video, as well as their placement on this grand map of ours. But thanks so much for watching today, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, but also comment and tell me your thoughts on the video. You know, am I full of shit? Do you agree? I'd love to hear what you have to say, or maybe you've thought of another portion of the lore that I completely glossed over or missed, and you want that to be represented in the next video. More than happy to do that. But in the meantime, guys, have a good one and take care.